Daniel Weiss lived by systems, lines of code, budgeting spreadsheets, gym routines timed to the minute. He believed in predictability, not because he feared chaos, but because it gave him control. His wife, Lena, seemed to understand that. Their 10-year marriage had become a rhythm of quiet mornings, tidy conversations, and muted affection. Every Saturday, she packed a cloth bag with food and essentials and drove across town to drop them off at Daniel's aging father's home. She said it was important to keep traditions, to show kindness where it was owed. Daniel rarely went himself. He was usually buried in work, fixing data infrastructure for a logistics company. Saturdays were his only break, and he guarded them with the intensity of someone who needed silence to survive. Still, he appreciated Lena's devotion. His father, once a factory technician, had grown frail and quiet since his wife passed. Lena filled the gap, and Daniel was grateful. When she came home Saturday nights, she always smelled like his father's porch, old wood and lavender hand soap. They'd have tea, sometimes watch a documentary. It wasn't love, the way movies told it, but it was consistent, safe. Lately, though, Lena had been elsewhere. Not physically. She still came and went like clockwork, but emotionally there was a lag. She seemed distracted, distant even, when present. Daniel noticed, cataloged the behavior like data points, but told himself not to overthink. She was probably stressed. Work had been hard on both of them. Maybe she just needed space. Still, when she said she'd be staying overnight at his father's this weekend due to a predicted storm, something flickered in Daniel's gut, something illogical, but persistent. He decided he'd surprise her in the morning. The next morning, Daniel stood by the kitchen counter, waiting for the coffee to finish brewing, but his mind wasn't on caffeine. He replayed Lena's words from the night before, how the storm might flood the road near his father's house, how she'd packed extra clothes and would sleep in the guest room. She said it casually, like she'd done it before. But Daniel couldn't remember a time she'd stayed overnight. He tried to shrug it off. Lena was thoughtful, cautious. Maybe she was just being practical. Still, something didn't sit right. Over the past few months, she'd become increasingly protective of her phone, flipping it screen down on the table, answering texts in another room. When he asked about it, she'd smile thinly and say, "Just clients. You wouldn't believe how many late-night speech emergencies pop up." It was a joke, but her tone didn't match the punchline. Daniel, by habit, kept things to himself, but now his silence felt complicit. His logical mind fought against the undercurrent of doubt. There was no evidence of anything wrong, just changes in behavior. Subtle shift in how often she made eye contact, how she stopped asking about his projects at work. He'd even caught her humming a lullaby once in the kitchen, something she hadn't done since they'd lost their last chance at having children years ago. He started noticing other things. Once, when Lena came back from her usual Saturday visit, she smelled like baby powder. She said it was from helping a neighbor's toddler who spilled something, but her explanation was rushed, her tone defensive. Another time, he saw a photo on her phone while she was texting, a little girl, no older than 5, with Lena's eyes and wild curls. When he asked who it was, Lena said it was a client's child. Daniel nodded, but the image stayed burned in his memory. She hadn't mentioned working with kids in months. He brushed the doubt away then, as he always did. But this morning, coffee in hand, rain tapping the windows, and silence pressing in, he couldn't ignore it anymore. Something was off. Something was being kept from him. So when he glanced at the clock and saw it was past 9, he made a decision. He'd drive to his father's house, no warning, no message, just show up and see what the day had to say. Daniel didn't rush. If this was paranoia, he wanted to give it every chance to unravel before he acted like a fool. He finished his coffee, rinsed the mug, and stared out the kitchen window. The rain had eased into a drizzle, not the storm Lena had warned about. That, too, nudged his unease. He opened the hallway closet and pulled out his jacket, grabbed a paper bag, and filled it with his father's favorites. The act made him feel calmer, like this was just a spontaneous kindness, not a mission. His rational mind told him he might find nothing unusual. Maybe Lena was just there, reading in the guest room, watching the rain through the old porch windows. But something in his gut disagreed. It wasn't the kind of suspicion that came from jealousy or possessiveness. Daniel was never wired that way. It came from patterns. Lena's behavior had shifted in ways too consistent to be ignored. He backed the car out of the garage and drove out of the city, past rows of blinking traffic lights, into quieter roads that curved through the suburbs. He hadn't visited his father's house in months. Lena always insisted she had it covered. He let her, trusting that she found comfort in caretaking the way he found comfort in order. The closer he got to the neighborhood, the tighter his chest felt. He kept telling himself this was just a check-in, that he'd pull up to the house, find Lena making tea, his father napping, and feel foolish for ever doubting her. But just before he turned onto his father's street, something caught his eye. A small, and there, unmistakably, was Lena's car, parked in front of a house that wasn't his father's. Daniel pulled over a few houses down, his pulse accelerating in a way he wasn't used to. He turned off the ignition and sat in silence, watching Lena's car through the drizzle-specked windshield. It was definitely hers, same dent near the rear bumper, same university parking sticker. The house in front of it was small, well-kept, with a trimmed hedge and a toy scooter leaning against the porch steps. He hadn't known she ever came here. This wasn't part of the story she told. He stepped out quietly, staying half-hidden behind a row of shrubs across the street, unsure of what he was even looking for. Part of him still hoped to see something that made sense. But then the door opened, and there she was, Lena, stepping onto the porch, holding a mug in one hand. She laughed at something, and a man followed her out. Mid-30s, tall, a little unshaven, wearing house slippers and an easy familiarity. Lena handed him the mug, and he sipped without hesitation, like this was a ritual. Then a child appeared, a little girl, maybe 5 or 6, her dark curls wild, her face open and unbothered. She ran past Lena, straight to the man, who scooped her up effortlessly and spun her around. The girl squealed, then wriggled out of his arms and tugged on Lena's sleeve. "Mama, I'm hungry," Daniel heard her say as the 3 of them went back inside. The word cracked through Daniel's ribs like a blunt object. Mama. The girl had called her mama. He stumbled back behind the shrub as if the house itself had shoved him. His mind raced, refusing to align this scene with the woman he knew. Lena had never mentioned a child. They had tried, once, years ago, and it hadn't worked. After that, the subject became a tender silence between them. But now, here was a child, clearly hers, unmistakably resembling her, and a domestic scene that radiated the kind of warmth they hadn't shared in years. Daniel felt like he was watching someone else's life. He stood there frozen, unable to move or even think clearly. Emotions surged in waves: confusion, betrayal, disbelief. Was this a new life she'd built? A past she'd never disclosed? Or something that had coexisted with their marriage all along? Each possibility hurt in a different way. He felt the edges of his world blur, like code that suddenly refused to compile. As the rain began to pick up again, he turned away, heart thudding, and made his way back to the car without looking back. He didn't start the engine right away. He just sat there, hands on the wheel, trying to breathe. He had no plan, no confrontation rehearsed, just one question repeating in his head like a broken function. Who is she? Daniel drove without direction, his hands trembling slightly on the steering wheel. The rain blurred the edges of the road and the world beyond it, matching the haze in his mind. He wasn't angry yet. Anger required clarity. Right now, he was simply shattered, confused, in a way that logic couldn't untangle. He kept seeing the child's face, hearing her call, "Lena, Mama." His chest tightened every time the word replayed in his head. For 10 years, Lena had lived beside him, sharing routines, inside jokes, Sunday grocery lists, and never once had she told him she had a daughter. Or was she born later? Was the girl even Lena's? He couldn't be sure. But deep down, he knew. The resemblance was too strong, that protective warmth in Lena's voice. He thought back to their marriage, how it had become muted over time, not broken, just quiet. He'd chalked it up to stress, to the way long-term relationships shift. Maybe he'd even preferred the distance. Daniel wasn't the emotional one, after all. He had let Lena carry the weight of connection while he focused on work, systems, and silence. But this wasn't distance. This was deception. He trusted her with his life, and now it felt like a stranger had worn her face for years. Memories came flooding back, their failed IVF attempt, Lena's long walks afterward, her tears she'd thought he didn't notice. Had the child been a backup plan, an escape? He couldn't know yet, but it hurt that she never gave him the chance to understand, never trusted him with the truth. He gripped the steering wheel tighter, pulled over to the side of the road, and sat there in the dim hush of the rain. He didn't cry, he never cried, but the feeling was close, lodged in his throat, heavy and unmovable. Whatever this was, whoever Lena really was, Daniel knew one thing. The version of his life he thought was true had just collapsed. And no matter what he did next, nothing would ever return to the way it was. A week passed before Daniel returned to Willow Lane. He told himself it wasn't revenge he was after or confrontation. It was clarity, answers, understanding, something his wife hadn't offered. This time, he dressed casually. No wedding ring, no signs of tension. He parked around the corner and walked past the modest house like someone considering real estate or admiring the neighborhood. As he passed the gate, the front door opened. The same man, Aaron, stepped out carrying a toolbox, squinting at the sky like he was checking for rain. Daniel hesitated, then doubled back with practiced ease. "Excuse me," he called. "You live here?" Aaron nodded. "Yeah, can I help you?" Daniel offered a polite smile. "Just passing through. I'm thinking of buying nearby. Place seems quiet." Aaron leaned on the railing. "It is. Not much goes on around here, which is the point." His tone wasn't defensive, just direct. Daniel nodded. "Nice house, family place." Aaron tilted his head slightly, like he wasn't sure how to answer. "Something like that. Shared custody. My daughter lives here part of the week." The words hit like a pin in Daniel's chest. He kept his face neutral. "Sounds like a good setup." "It works," Aaron said. "She's a great kid." There was a pause. Daniel decided to push gently. "Her mom around?" Aaron glanced toward the door. "Yeah, inside. Well, we're not together. We co-parent. It's complicated." Daniel forced a small laugh. "Aren't they all?" Aaron smirked but didn't elaborate. There was no romantic tension in how he spoke, no defensiveness. If anything, he sounded tired, like a man who had accepted a role he didn't choose, but honored anyway. After a few more pleasantries, Daniel thanked him and walked off. He didn't have everything, but he had enough. Lena hadn't been living a secret love story. She'd been hiding something older, deeper, something tangled in obligation, guilt, and fear. And now Daniel understood one more thing. Aaron wasn't the threat. He wasn't the one Lena was afraid of losing. Daniel was. That evening, Daniel returned home to find Lena in the kitchen, slicing vegetables like it was any other night. The sight of her doing something so ordinary filled him with a strange, simmering grief. She looked up and smiled faintly, unaware of the storm he carried in with him. "You're home early," she said. He didn't answer. Instead, he sat at the table and looked at her like she was a puzzle he'd studied 100 times. "I went to Willow Lane," he said. The knife paused midair. Her shoulders stiffened, but she didn't turn around. "I saw you with her. The child. The man." Silence stretched like a held breath. Then Lena set the knife down carefully and turned to face him, eyes wide, not surprised, just exposed. "I was going to tell you," she said softly. "I just never found the right time." Daniel shook his head slowly. 10 years, Lena. There was time. She sat across from him, folding her hands. "Her name is Emma. She's my daughter, from before you and I met. I was in a relationship that didn't last. Aaron, he's her father. We were never married. We agreed to co-parent, but when you and I got serious, I panicked. I was afraid you wouldn't want me, wouldn't want her." Daniel tried to process it. "You've been living 2 lives. That little girl has no idea who I am." "I know," Lena whispered. "I hated lying to you. I hated hiding her. But I thought I could protect you both. I never cheated on you, Daniel. This isn't an affair. It's my past. And I was a coward." He stared at her, anger diluted now by something heavier, exhaustion, sorrow. "Why didn't you trust me enough to tell me?" "Because I didn't want to lose you," she said. "And because once I didn't say it at the beginning, it got harder every year. I thought I could balance it, keep everything from breaking." Daniel didn't speak for a long time. She had betrayed him, not with infidelity, but with omission, with the denial of truth. But she hadn't spoken out of malice. She had spoken, finally, from fear, and now from regret. Daniel packed a small bag the next morning, without saying much. He told Lena he needed space, and she didn't argue. Her silence wasn't cold. It was permission. He drove north to his late mother's cabin, tucked away near a quiet lake, surrounded by tall pines and silence thick enough to think in. The place had no Wi-Fi, no TV, just a creaky floor, a wood-burning stove, and a thread-burned couch where he used to read as a teenager. For the first 2 days, he barely spoke aloud. He took long walks through the trees, made coffee he barely touched, and stared at the same 3 pages of a book without taking in a word. His mind spun in loops. Lena, Emma, Aaron, the lies, the years he thought he knew her, and then him. What role had he played in this silence? He'd always been detached, efficient, predictable, emotionally safe. He had wanted children once, yes, but when the IVF failed, he'd buried the grief in spreadsheets and cleaned dishes. Lena had cried alone, and he'd stood beside her like an observer, not a partner. Had she seen in Aaron something Daniel couldn't? Or she hadn't left him. She had tried to build something solid with him while protecting the softest part of her life from collapse. Still, the betrayal was real, the omission was real, but so was the love, or something close to it, that they had built. Daniel didn't know if he could forgive Lena yet, but he knew he needed to understand her, not just her actions, but her fear, and he had to face his own part in the distance that had quietly grown between them. Alone in the cabin's quiet, Daniel began to feel the first flickers of clarity. Daniel returned to the city 5 days later, unsure of what he'd say, but knowing he had to say something. Lena was sitting on the couch when he walked in, the same place she'd been when he left. She stood, uncertain, her face tight with worry and hope. "I wasn't sure you'd come back," she said. He nodded, placing his keys on the table. "I needed time. I still do." She didn't move toward him, and he didn't ask her to. The air between them held the weight of things broken, but not yet discarded. He looked at her, really looked, and said, "I'm not leaving, but I'm not pretending everything's fine either. If we're going to fix this, it has to be real. All of it." Lena's eyes welled up, but she didn't speak. She just nodded, as if anything more. The next weekend, Daniel asked to meet Emma. Lena looked surprised, then grateful. She arranged it carefully, no pressure, just a short visit. They drove together to Willow Lane, Lena gripping the steering wheel like it was a lifeline. Emma was shy at first, peeking out from behind her mother's leg. Daniel knelt to her level and smiled. "Hi, I'm Daniel," he said. "I've heard a lot about you." She tilted her head, curious. "You talk quiet, like Mommy does when she's sad," she said. It stunned him, but somehow it helped. Inside, Daniel gave Elena a name he now knew, some pastries and tea. They sat together, talking about nothing urgent, school, cartoons, whether Emma liked broccoli. But for Daniel, it was everything. It was the beginning of something honest, awkward, fragile, and real. And as they sat in that modest kitchen, he realized this wasn't the end of his life. It was the start of a different version, one where the truth, no matter how painfully, had a seat at the table. The story of Daniel, Lena, and the quiet truth tucked away on Willow Lane reminds us that love isn't just built on shared routines or good intentions. It's built on honesty, vulnerability, and the courage to face what's uncomfortable. Silence can protect in the short term, but over time, it erodes trust. Daniel didn't walk away because he was betrayed. He stayed because he chose to understand before judging. Forgiveness didn't mean forgetting. It meant facing the full truth and choosing to move forward with eyes open. We all carry parts of ourselves we're afraid to reveal, but real connection begins when we choose to bring those parts into the light. If this story moved you, made you reflect, or reminded you of the power of truth in relationships, like this post, subscribe to the channel for more stories that dig deeper than the surface, and share it with someone who needs a quiet reminder that healing is possible even after the truth breaks the silence. Stay human, stay honest, and keep reading.